Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will simply say that anyone who thinks that Republicans have not been the leading voices on funding the police and that Democrats have been the leading voices to defund the police, don't ask us, ask the police. Look around the country and see the devastating state of crime in America. Don't ask us, ask the people of the country who sides with the police and who does not. I will simply say that, Mr. Green, those are your comments. Those are your retweets. We would love to get you or Twitter to provide us with all your retweets or your tweets. We could have a serious conversation about that. But I'm not going to politicize that issue because I think there are other issues that are incredibly important. We will not see eye to eye on that issue. So let's talk about something that I think is equally important to those folks living in HUD homes. On April the 7th, despite bipartisan support from both sides of Congress to overturn the regulation, President Biden vetoed a resolution that would have reversed the EPA's WOTUS rule. In addition, this regulation will have a massive impact on farmers, ranchers, and small businesses across the country. I'm extremely concerned about the fact that potential impacts that this will have on affordable housing as well. This rule will require federal assessments on construction sites across the country by expanding federal authority over drainage ditches, water tanks, irrigation systems. Virtually every association responsible for building affordable housing, they're all ringing the alarm bells about how this regulatory overreach will create massive delays and higher costs. Would you agree with those organizations? Mr. Green.
Thank you, Ranking Member Scott. So I've dedicated much of my career to expanding,
and mostly because I only have 2.5 minutes
expanding
left.
the supply of affordable housing, including conducting research and removing regulatory barriers. In my experience, and I think based on the research, most of the barriers that impede the supply of housing are state and local overly restrictive state and local land use reforms. I am generally familiar with the EPA actions you've described, but not enough to be able to provide an answer as to what impact they're going to have on housing. Let me ask you a shorter question then.
Do you think the federal government should be regulating every ditch in America?
I do not.
Okay, good enough for me. Dr. Bernstein, I enjoyed reading about your family's history. I think it's a powerful testament to the American dream and truly appreciate that. I'd love to ask you just a few yes/no questions as often as we can get to the yes/no quickly. We both will benefit from that. Generally supportive of opportunity zones?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, sounds great. One of the comments that you've made about inflation, I would, of course, take exception to the fact that the inflation was basically the byproduct of first COVID and finally the war. I would just suggest that as it relates to gas prices, about before the Putin invasion of Ukraine, gas prices were up about 60% here in our country. And so I would not put the burden of inflation simply on those two. I would also add on top of that $4 trillion of federal spending that led to the 9.1% inflationary effect. Something that you said in the Washington Post piece that you wrote in 2020 said that anyone who voted for the TCJA has zero credibility on deficits and should summarily be ignored, if not ridiculed. That would, of course, include every single Republican that's going to have a choice in voting for you or not. Do you continue to stand behind that statement? And the one thing I'd add on top of that is that after being a part of the team that wrote the bill, we saw in 2018, revenues to the Treasury went up, not down. So that would actually improve, not reduce the likelihood of us making our bills. And number two, in 2019, add another 3% on top of the 3%. So therefore, with lower taxes, revenues to the Treasury actually went up. So do you still think that Republicans should be ridiculed for the support of that?
So I certainly don't. And I also think it's very important to look at the context of comments like that. So contextually, one of the point that I was making was that if you look at the main factor that's been driving up both deficits and debt, it is clearly diminished revenues. And the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act definitely played a role in diminishing revenues flowing to the Treasury. You can find a quarter or two that supports your interpretation.
Yes, sir.
But it is widely, let me just finish. It is widely understood
I
to
have
be the
less
case
time left, so I'm just going to tell you
that the revenue factor is as
Dr.
I described.
Bernstein, let me ask you one more question.
Sure.
So 4 quarters are what you have in 12 months, and 4 quarters 12 months later, we had an increase in revenue, not a decrease in revenue. Then another 4 quarters in a row, we had another increase in revenue, not a decrease in revenue. So therefore, I would say that it's not a quarterly snapshot. It's actually a 12 months period of time where we saw more revenue coming to the Treasury, not less money coming to the Treasury.
This is not a controversial issue, Senator.
I agree with you on that part. So let me ask you my next
widely
question. Let me ask you my
agreed
next
upon.
question, by the way. You also said in 2017 Washington Post piece that Republicans are good at getting elected, lousy at governance. Do you continue to stand by that statement?
Again, I think that lifting statements out of context can lead to things that certainly don't describe my views.
But you would understand why I would find these statements to be concerning, because let me just read
Absolutely.
it again.
If I can respond. My entire professional career has been dedicated to working with people across the aisle to do precisely what you said in your opening comments, was to lift up the economic opportunities to everyday Americans, hand-ups over hand-outs.
Yes.
It's why I worked on opportunity zones with the Trump administration. It's why the letter from Republican former CEA chairs endorsed my nomination. And so I look forward, if confirmed, to continuing to working with you on policies that do precisely what I think meet both of our goals in that regard.
I look for that as well. I would just suggest for you and future noms that while we're going to have strong disagreements on politics and perhaps philosophy, and we probably should because we don't see the world from the same vantage point, that's okay.
Yeah.
But to suggest that in the time of we live today that people should be ridiculed, taking that out of context, maybe, but probably not. I just think we should be very careful on how we, I try not to demonize the other side.
I agree with you,
I'm not talking about anybody personally. I'm just talking about politics.
I agree with you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Senator Warner of Virginia is recognized from his office.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Bernstein,